As anyone who's read a half-decent shonen series would know, one of the key ingredients is a good old-fashioned fight scene. The best fights are often composed of equally matched opponents with more similarities than differences. But those few differences are what truly define them. So I thought to myself, why not try and replicate that here? With that said, my name is Michael, and this is our first episode of Building the Arc Versus, where I bring you the sweatiest anime coverage as we pit two arcs against each other to see which builds the arc better? Our fighters today are Yu Yu Hakusho's Spirit Detective Saga and Bleach's Substitute Shinigami Saga. Heaven or hell, let's see who survives. Doesn't that seem a little bit drastic? They're just manga. Whatever. I think you get the point. Before really getting knee-deep into this, I must explain that the final conclusion I come to at the end is my own, much like everything else I make. And me being a fucking smooth brain, I know that my conclusion is not going to please anybody. Whether you're a Bleach fan or a Yu Yu Hakusho fan, someone's going to bitch about something that I talk about in this video. But nonetheless, just, put that aside. I know how people can get, and I know how weebs can get, and I make that distinction because I think we all know that weebs don't actually count as people. Also, while we're here, I'll lay down some ground rules as to the format of this kind of episode, since this isn't a typical building the arc. Right now I'm covering sagas much less than arcs, so it can get a little bit long-winded in some cases, but to keep things simple, I'm grading them on 5 different criteria unique to them due to the fact that they're both opening arcs. In other Building the Arc verses, these things will change depending on what I'm looking for. This time around, I'm basing it on which has the better introduction, characters, stories, action, and finally, how well they transition into their next arc. So with that all cleared up, let me give you a brief history of each series we're looking at today. Beginning its run on December 3rd, 1990, Yu Yu Hakusho was written by Yoshihiro Togashi. After exploding in popularity early on, it quickly rose to the ranks of Inoue's Slam Dunk and Toriyama's Dragon Ball Z to form the original Big Three of Shonen Jump, which carried the brand from the late 80s and early 90s, known as their boom period. Now, I and many others place this series on a high pedestal of being one of the best shonens ever made, and just one of the best out of a decade of great shonen. The thing is, it is still an imperfect series, especially early on with its baby steps. It has somewhat of a rough opening, so I'm not going to let my bias of it being in my top 10 favorite anime of all time really sway my judgment here. Bleach began its run on August 1st, 2001, written by manga's most tragic story Tede Kubo. It's known for absolutely amazing artwork and being part of Shonen Jump's second Big Three alongside Kishimoto's Naruto and Oda's One Piece. I don't actually have much of a history with Bleach. I'd only really started to read it a few months back, but I actually really love what I've read so far. Now, keep in mind, I'm only starting the Quincy Blood War arc, where most people, if they haven't said the Arrancar arc was bad at that point, they're like, this is really fucking bad, dude, just stop. And I gotta stick with it. I just gotta finish it, just for the meme, for the show, for the culture. I actually think that Bleach is a really interesting series, not to read, because it's still a good series with a lot of interesting things to work with, but the aura around Bleach is so much more interesting than the story. Because even if you have never read or watched or barely understand what Bleach is about, you know Bleach as Bleach. That series that everybody loved when it started, and just, oh no, my child is burning! It's amazing that a series gigabotched itself so hard. As a wise Canadian man once said, the Omega Flub. And that is so fascinating to read when you had no context on it beforehand. When you only know Bleach as being that series, and you read it, you're surprised with how good it starts, and how good it consistently stays for a long ass time. If most shonen are getting bad, they're getting bad at around chapter 100, 150. And Bleach hits its highest point at that time, which is insane to think that he gigaflubbed it at the very end. You were at the goal line. How'd you do that, Kubo? No! But I digress. The thing is, reading Bleach in the modern day is kind of like the manga equivalent of a jump scare. I'm having fun now. I know it's gonna get bad. And that's what scares the fuck out of me when it jumps out at me. He's like, ooga booga, bad character writing. It just doesn't work. By the way, I do fully intend to cover every Bleach arc on this channel, so that you and I can walk through the decline of this series together and figure out where it actually does go wrong. Now, just taking a look at the small history I just gave, some similarities in the series begin to pop up right there. Both are wildly popular in Japan and have crossover success in America. Both carried the Shonen Jump brand for a while alongside two other famous series. Both are known for a decline in health in their respective authors, and both are notorious for having unsatisfactory, rushed endings. I can even get real petty with this and just give a vague plot synopsis. Try and guess which one I'm talking about. A high school age youth who is missing at least one of his parents has his seemingly average life flipped upside down as he's thrust into a spiritual adventure alongside a mysterious girl in which he uses his powers to see dead people and other ghouls, and he uses these to hunt demons alongside a meat-headed companion who he sometimes butts heads with. If your answer is Yu Yu Hakusho, you're wrong! It's XXX Holic. Thanks for playing. I kid, but honestly, Bleach and Yu Yu Hakusho start off so similarly from a structural standpoint, it's almost comical in a way. Just the getting the gang together opening saga is filled with team building exercises that make for good arbitrary comparisons such as this. Speaking of arbitrary comparisons, I think it's high time we jump into our first one, which is, which series has the better introduction? Yu Yu Hakusho starts off with a delinquent named Yusuke Urameshi getting hit by a car and dying trying to save a child. He's given an ultimatum to come back to life that he actually declines, but after seeing how much he meant to everyone at his wake, he takes up the offer, that is to perform good deeds to hatch a spirit beast, and if he performs evil or selfish deeds, he'll be punished with death by spirit beast. So with the help of the fairy woman of the underworld, Botan, he goes out on his quest to come back to life. Bleach begins with high schooler Ichigo Kurosaki just kind of fucking around in his house when a girl comes through his wall and jumps out just as fast. Since Ichigo can see spirits, he's instantly alerted to this and begins to follow her, where he sees her wounded by a monster called a Hollow. Seeing no other option, the girl reveals herself as a Shinigami, or Soul Reaper, named Rukia Kuchiki. She gives Ichigo some of her powers and he fights off the Hollow and a friendship begins. What did I mean by introductions? Well, what I'm specifically looking for is how well the author introduces us to our protagonist, and how they set ground rules for the series and its world. Both do a good job of characterizing their protags, but seeing the transformation from generic thug to heart of gold that Yusuke undergoes, while still keeping some of those delinquent tendencies of his, in only just a few chapters, is really something, and is just a testament to how good of a writer Togashi really is. I'm not saying Ichigo is unlikable or anything, but come on. Yusuke is like one of the great all-time shonen protagonists, and that scene at his wake with Kuwabara it always just yanks at my heartstrings. Ichigo just doesn't immediately endear himself quite in the same way that Yusuke does. On the other hand, when it comes to explaining the rules of the world and its powers, I think Bleach has it beat. Yu Yu Hakusho is great, but its power structure and all can be called generic. And I can understand where that sentiment of saying it's generic comes from, because objectively it's just energy and demons and shit, and that's really it. The only thing that ever gets a rule set to it is the spirit gun, or ray gun if you're a super weeb. And that's really it. Most characters just do what they do because they can do it. While in Bleach, you slowly learn alongside Ichigo the inner workings of a Shinigami's life, their responsibilities, their powers, their relationships with other groups such as Quincy's, and by the time you're at the end, you've learned so much, it just feels natural to you, because Ichigo was learning the same thing with you. That makes his character a little bit more relatable, while Yusuke, you kind of figure things out before he does. One point in and I've already hit my first split. While I adore the way Yu Yu Hakusho opens up on a narrative level, I just like how fleshed out and structured Bleach's world is. At the risk of sounding indecisive, I've got to give the point to both series. The tie is arbitrary, yeah, but honestly, the way the two sagas introduce their respective series are great in their own ways. One a more character-centric affair, and the other more structural and lore-building focused. Due to my inability to pick a favorite son, the score is tied at 1-1. Next up is characters. Who has the better main cast? For Bleach, we have Ichigo, Rukia, Chad, Orihime, Urahara, and finally Uryu. I love this cast, especially Chad and Urahara. I love how each member is introduced to the group. I love the mentor role that Urahara plays. I just love how they bounce off of each other. I just love this group. So the next point goes to Yu Yu Hakusho. I mean, do I even really need to explain myself here? Fine. Yu Yu Hakusho has my money for top 3 most memorable casts in all of shonen manga. Let's do a quick run through in case there's some dweebist out of me, alright? Yusuke, Kuwabara, Hiei, Kurama, Botan, Genkai, Koima. I can keep going, but I'm gonna stop because I'm about to turn into a Pokemon rap. This section of the episode is unnecessary because everyone knows how great Yu Yu Hakusho's cast is. Everyone knows how much fun they are individually, and they just create this irresistible chemistry together. Like, don't get me wrong, I love Ichigo's friends in that group, but they can get on my nerves, especially Orihime, aka worst girl. Yeah, I said it. This also doesn't mean that Yu Yu Hakusho's cast is infallible. I do have issues with them, such as how Hiei and Kurama are introduced, and sometimes Koenma and Keiko can be a bit annoying. But for now, the score is 2-1 in Yu Yu Hakusho's favor. When it comes down to stories told within both sagas, it's that endless fight of quantity versus quality. Bleach definitely has more stories with its intro arc, Orihime arc, Chad arc, Don Kanonji arc, Ichigo's backstory, and the Shinigami Quincy contest arc. And in a rare case, these are all better than Yu Yu Hakusho's combined. Now, the arcs in Yu Yu Hakusho, some of them stand out and some of them are just kind of weak. Again, Yusuke's ordeal is great, and it really makes you feel for his character. And the invasion of Tarukane's manor is just a great, solid arc. But things like the Saint Beast and Genkai's tournament, they just really don't do anything for me, more or less because they're just kind of boring. This is a definite case of personal bias, but just hear me out. The problem I have with the opening parts of Yu Yu Hakusho is I just hate the getting the band together trope of collecting your protagonist. I mentioned it a bit earlier, but in Bleach it feels so natural when a new member joins the group because they've all known each other for quite a while, and they all come together at once at a pretty good time. There's no faffing about of, will they join, will they be enemies, will they be friends? Even characters like Uryu, who are hostile towards the other members, still join the group, and there's no question about that. We don't have an arc dedicated to getting Uryu back because we need him. Uryu goes because he's motivated. That's the thing. He and Kurama just kind of join because they have to and just do it, and it's a mess sometimes. And Bleach also doesn't hit that point of, okay, we got our characters together, now we gotta build the team up. Like, the Saint Beast saga is really guilty of making sure every single audience member knows that Kuwabara is the muscle-bounded meathead, Hiei is the edgelord too cool for you tsundere, Kurama is the sweet but also strong one, Yusuke is the rambunctious rebel who's really strong and the super strength. Bleach just kind of does things, and it feels so natural. It's such a sense of flow with its stories. Everything, while not flowing directly into each other, they feel natural happening one after another. Watching or reading Yu Yu Hakusho nowadays, people often criticize it for it being too formulaic, which is a cowardly way of saying it's old and I'm a baby. All of the opening arcs in Yu Yu Hakusho are typical now, but at the time they did set those standards. But if I were basing this arbitrary contest off of historical and cultural importance, then the Anglo-Zanzibar War would have won for the better arc already. But it didn't now, did it? As for now, the score is tied up at 2. As I mentioned at the top of the video, action is one of the core tenets of a shonen manga, and up until now I haven't really spoken much about how action really influences a series. Yu Yu Hakusho is renowned for having some of the best shonen fights put to page, and they really are something. Problem is, most of them are in the next arc and not in this one. Meanwhile, Bleach gives the audience a fine mix of all sorts of battles. All the hollows Ichigo encounters are unique in both design and personality, and almost all of them speak to some aspect of the character they're related to. This dynamic gives every encounter a much more engaging feeling and hooks the audience from the first couple of steps and just never lets go. The fights in the opening parts of Yu Yu Hakusho feel passé. Even in its heyday, the fights come off as somewhat bland when compared to something like Dragon Ball Z. The thing is, there are still great fights in those opening arcs, mainly the fight with the Toguro brothers against Kuwabara and Yusuke, and the fight that Kuwabara has against the second Saint Beast. For me, this comes down to the fact that Kubo is just a better artist than Togashi is. All of Kubo's fights have this fantastic sense of speed, weight, and above all, impact. That impact you feel on every panel of a Bleach fight draws you into it. Kubo's fights are structured very Star Wars-like, not in how they're portrayed, but what they mean. More often than not, a Bleach fight is an argument, a war of two thought processes that is reflected in how characters often move, pose, and strike differently from each other. All fights in the beginning of Bleach are often just Ichigo versus a Hollow, which is portrayed as a quiet voice against a loud scream, which creates this underdog story that Ichigo follows throughout the entire series. Ichigo always being that quiet, rational voice always gives the audience something to root for, because they know that in that argument a loud screech will always drown it out, but in some way Ichigo always manages to pull out a win, which makes his fights even better at the end when you get that sense of catharsis. While I do have some soft spots for Yu Yu Hakusho, its opening fights aren't one. With that, the score is now 3-2 in Bleach's favor. Finally, we come to a fairly unique category for opening arcs, and that's how well these arcs transition into the next major story arc. For Bleach, that's how well we enter into the Soul Society arc, and for Yu Yu Hakusho, how we're challenged to face the Dark Tournament saga. I made this category specifically for these two arcs, since I know for a fact it would be the hardest to come to a conclusion for, but besides the bullshit tie I made up earlier. This needs a sufficient answer, and I will just drop all pomp and circumstance and be upfront with it. Bleach wins this category. Now the harder part is to answer why. Let me lay out a checklist for what I'm looking for in a good transition. 1. We get a clear idea of what the oncoming threat is. 2. We relate to our protagonist's struggle as they prep for this threat. And 3. We have a good reason to go beyond, this is a threat that will hurt me, the protagonist. Maybe if I work backwards, this will make more sense. So let's observe Yu Yu Hakusho's transition. We get a fantastic fight between the Toguro brothers and the team of Yusuke and Kuwabara. This ends in a win for Team Spirit Detective, but as they leave, we find out it's a farce, and the Toguros just jobbed for them more or less. The younger Toguro confronts Yusuke a while later, roughs him up a bit, and then vanishes, threatening that if Yusuke doesn't show up at the Dark Tournament, he's, as the academics would say, fucked. Now, let's look at our checklist. We have a clear idea of what the threat is, aka a demon tournament, and we have a good reason to go since not only will Yusuke be fucked, but everyone he cares about will be too. It's that middle part that we miss. We know that Yusuke struggles when he trains with Genkai, we've seen it before, and he just trains off screen. We already had a training arc in a way with Yusuke and Genkai, but a really good training arc not only expands our character's ability, but also their personalities. That struggle the audience witnesses during a good training arc puts them in the shoes of the protagonist and really gives them that oomph that they care for this character, because he's trying his goddamn best to be the best that they are. That is what a good training arc succeeds. A bad training arc fails in that way and just makes us watch a character do tough things and that's it. That's boring. Nobody wants to see that. But if that struggle is real and that struggle is human, then people will latch onto a good training arc and not even think of it as what is ostensibly canon filler. When you look at Bleach, we see two dudes rolling up on Rukia after the invasion and subsequent repelling of the Menos Grande, questioning her about a bunch of Shinigami stuff that we don't quite understand. Hearing his friend may be in danger, Ichigo rushes out and confronts Byakuya and Renji, and gets his fucking teeth kicked in. Ichigo up until this point has been portrayed as a loose cannon who always managed to pull it out at the end. But here, he just gets destroyed. But we get that hint of, whoa, maybe there's more to Ichigo than we think, from Renji, who comments that his unrestrained energy from his Zanpakuto is cluing the audience in that maybe Ichigo is a little bit stronger than he's letting on. He just needs to know a way to control it, and that control is going to come back in a little bit. But seeing a character like Rukia, who's funny, kind, and overall really likable, just drag Ichigo through the mud after he attempted to save her, that hits the audience in a really weird way where we're just as confused as Ichigo is. And as it seems that all hope is lost for the substitute Shinigami, and just having his strength taken from him and being left for dead, we see Urahara and we know for a fact that things are about to pop off. This training arc is how you do it. It parallels Yu Yu Hakusho perfectly, as it shows more of what Ichigo is up to than what his friends are up to. That struggle with his inner hollow and his Zanpakuto really puts the audience behind Ichigo in full support of his rescue mission. All the while, we're catching brief glimpses of Chad, Orihime, and the reluctant Uryu all training with or in the general vicinity of Yoruichi. Added to this, we also have a full and complete understanding that the threat of Rukia dying is very real. But we're also left in the dark as to what the inner workings of the Soul Society actually are, just like our main cast. So everything they encounter is a new dilemma for them and for the audience as well, which causes us to feel more for our characters. And finally, that motivation to save Rukia by all means necessary puts Ichigo in a position where this is more than just a pride thing. This is a real ass mission to do what's right by them. And that's what I think hooked many readers back in the early 2000s, and what really sunk them into one of the best arcs ever with the Soul Society. Just like that, we have our first winner of building the arc versus, and that is Bleach's Substitute Shinigami Saga. When I was in the planning stages of this video, I thought beyond a shadow of a doubt Yu Yu Hakusho would win. But the more I thought about it, the opening motions of Bleach are just so much more focused and refined. It makes 70 chapters feel like 10 by engrossing the audience in the world it creates and the characters that inhabit it. I know for a fact someone out there is mad as hell right now, and that's my editor. But nonetheless, this is just my opinion. As a series overall, I like Yu Yu Hakusho way more than Bleach. But I thought it would be fun to do this little exercise to shed some light on what I think makes a really fantastic opening arc. Since, as of right now, the time for beginnings is over, as we enter the next phase of building the arc. And trust me, we are going to spend a long ass time in the next chapter of my show. And to kick off the Shit Gets Real saga of building the arc is Hunter x Hunter's York New City arc. With that, my name is Michael, this has been Building the Arc, I'll see you next time. Get excited.
"Oh, I love you."